Obese girl, sold to brothel by father, mountain man, paid her freedom but died, protecting her dream. 200 for the fat one, the drunk slurred, and Devil's Crossing pretended not to hear its own heart. Snow rattled the shutters of Madame Lucille's establishment, that crooked house where oil lamps made sinners look like saints and saints look away. At a back table, Raymond Hartley counted debts he could not pay and hope he did not deserve. Beside him knelt his daughter, Cordelia, Cora, hands clasped so tight the knuckles blanched, tears striping the dust on her cheeks. She had stitched for years to keep a roof from slipping, cooked suppers she was never allowed to eat, learned to take up less space in a room than a shadow. Tonight, the shadow had a price tag. 100, Madame Lucille said, voice smooth as a blade. I'll spend twice that feeding her. Raymond's laugh was the sound of a door locking. Done. The coins landed like small funerals. Cora's fingers found the hem of her skirt, a habit left over from childhood. Touch cloth, count threads, hold steady. Papa, please, she whispered. I'll work. I'll waste away if you say. Just don't. His boot nudged her aside. Don't call me that. The deed was not written on paper. It was written across Cora's face as a pair of girls in rouge smirked from the stairwell, as Madame Lucille's hand closed in Cora's hair to drag her toward the kitchen door, as the house swallowed her into its engine of rooms where laughter always sounded one note too high. That night the wind switched to the north, and Devil's Crossing turned meaner for it. While the parlor's piano plinked its brazen lullaby, a basined sky emptied needles of ice on the alley. In the yard, Cora hunched over a wash-tub until her wrists burned, the water biting like truth. From inside, a man's voice stumbled through the doorway. Got anything heavier? Something different for a long winter? Laughter answered. Everything's for sale if the money's brave. Cora set the scrub board down. The world narrowed to the hinge of a gate, the distance to the tree line, the sound of her own breath. She had been obedient all her life, and it had led her here. Obedience was just another word for cage. When the house finally sagged into sleep, she wrapped herself in a thin coat, stole a heel of bread, and slipped through the back door into a night that did not want her. The cold hit like a wall. She ran anyway, feet skidding, lungs burning, the town's lamps shrinking to a smear. Snow deepened, the river's skin glazed black, and the world grew quiet in the way of places that have decided to let you die. She fell at the edge of the pines, breath a fraying thread. The stars tangled overhead. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf called. Another sound answered, the slow, unhurried tread of a man who did not rush for anything except the right thing. A shape knelt beside her, broad as a felled tree, coat smelling of smoke and winter. Hands like split oak lifted her as if weight were a lie the world had told too long. You'll not end here, the voice said, deep and certain, not while I'm on this mountain. When Cora awoke, she thought she'd died and been spared the telling. The room was warm, wrapped in the scent of pine sap and smoke. A fire murmured in the stone hearth, and a kettle hissed somewhere behind it. The blanket covering her was coarse wool, real, heavy, honest. She turned her head and saw him. The man sat in a rough-hewn chair near the fire, boots muddy, rifle leaned against the wall. He was huge, shoulders broad enough to block the light, hair silver as cold steel, beard untrimmed, a scar like lightning cut across his cheek. But it was his eyes that pinned her, gray, watchful, patient, the eyes of a man who had outlived more winters than he cared to count. When he spoke, the sound filled the room. "You're safe. Rest now." "Where am I?" "My cabin," he said simply. "Name's Callum Wolfsbane." The name fit him, half legend, half solitude. Folks in Devil's Crossing whispered about the mountain man who lived alone beyond the timberline. Some said he'd killed a bear with his bare hands. Others said he'd once had a wife who froze in a blizzard while he was away. Nobody knew the truth, because nobody ever came back from his mountain with more than a story. Cora tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness stopped her. How did I get here?" He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Found you in the snow near Dead Man's Creek. You were half frozen. Another hour, and you'd have been gone." She clutched the cup, letting the heat bite into her palms. "Why did you help me?" He shrugged, eyes on the fire. "Didn't think I'd want to answer if someone asked why I didn't." For the first time in years, Cora almost smiled. Over the next days, she learned the rhythm of his silence. Cal rose before dawn, chopped wood, hunted in the forest, returned with rabbits or trout. He spoke little, but every gesture carried a rough courtesy, leaving food by her bed, stoking the fire before leaving, hanging his coat near the door for her to use when she ventured outside. Cora, still weak, cleaned what she could. She washed the tin plates, swept the pine needle floor, folded his few shirts. She felt useless, but he never let her say it aloud. "You're healing," he said. "That's work enough." At night, the storm outside clawed the roof. In the flicker of the fire, Cora watched his hands, scarred, strong, capable. They looked like they'd known both creation and destruction. She wondered how many lives those hands had taken and how many they had saved. One evening, when the wind screamed like wolves, Cal told her to sit closer to the fire. "You've been shaking all day," he said, ladling stew into a bowl. "I'm fine." "You're not." He set the bowl in her hands. "Eat." The broth was thick with venison and roots. It was the first real meal she'd had in months. The heat spread through her body, thawing something inside that had been frozen long before she ran into the snow. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once, like gratitude embarrassed him. When the silence stretched, Cora spoke softly. "I don't have anywhere to go. My father sold me to a brothel." Cal's jaw tightened. The firelight threw hard shadows across his face. "I know that house," he said quietly. "Lucille runs her girls like cattle." "I wasn't even one of them," Cora whispered. "Just a help. But she said she'd start renting me out if I didn't work faster." Her voice cracked. "So I ran." He stared into the flames for a long time. Then he stood, crossed to the shelf, and pulled down a small pouch of coins. "What was the price?" "What?" "The price she paid your father." Cora blinked through tears. $100. Cal set his jaw. "Then I'll buy it back." She shook her head. "Why would you spend that on me?" "Because no one should own you." The next morning he saddled his horse, the leather creaking in the cold. "Stay by the fire. Don't open the door for anyone." Cora watched him ride down the mountain, his figure swallowed by fog. She didn't know if he'd return, but before sundown, the sound of hooves echoed again. Cal dismounted, stepped inside, and dropped a folded receipt onto the table. "She's been paid. You're free." Cora pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling. "You did that for me?" He nodded, removing his gloves. "Freedom shouldn't need reason." She took a trembling step forward. "Then let me stay. at least until I can repay you." Cal met her eyes, steady, unreadable, but softer than before. "We'll see." The wind outside eased. The fire burned steady. For the first time in years, Cora slept without fear. Morning broke pale and cold across the high ridges. A silver mist drifted between the pines, and the cabin's chimney trailed smoke that smelled of cedar and coffee. Callum stood outside splitting logs, each strike ringing through the valley like a hammer against time itself. Cora watched from the doorway, wrapped in his old coat, steam rising from her breath. For the first time since her escape, the silence didn't frighten her. It felt sacred, a silence that protected instead of condemned. When Cal caught her looking, he said simply, "We need supplies. You're coming with me." Her heart skipped. "To town?" He nodded. "Don't worry. We'll keep to the upper trail. Few folks brave that road in winter." Cora hesitated, her mind flashing back to Devil's Crossing, to the laughter, the sneers, the sound of boots on wooden floors. "What if someone sees me?" "Then they'll see a woman walking beside me," he said, fastening the cinch on his horse. "And that's all they'll see." The words settled somewhere deep in her chest. No man had ever spoken of her like that, without apology, without shame. They set out before noon. Cal rode his big roan gelding, and Cora sat behind him, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against the coarse wool of his coat. The wind bit at her face, but she didn't care. Each breath she took filled her lungs with pine and smoke and something she couldn't name. The trail wound upward into the mountains, through stands of fir and aspen. Snow lay deep in the hollows, and frozen waterfalls gleamed like glass. Cal rode steadily, his body swaying with the rhythm of the horse, his warmth steady against her front. Cora whispered once, almost to herself, "It's beautiful." He grunted a low reply. "It's honest. The mountain doesn't lie about what it is. Folks down there," he jerked his chin toward the valley, "they hide their rot behind pretty walls." Cora tightened her arms around him, feeling the unspoken weight behind his words. By mid-afternoon, they stopped beside a stream that cut through the ice, its water running black and fast. Cal built a small fire, set a tin pot over it, and handed her a slice of jerky and bread. She sat across from him, fingers trembling from cold and gratitude. "You didn't have to bring me." He looked at her then, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't have to find you either." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke from his fire and something faintly sweet from the pine resin. For a long while they said nothing. The mountain spoke for them, the crack of ice, the sigh of branches, the cry of a hawk high above. When they reached the outskirts of town, Cal told her to keep her hood up. "I'll be quick. Stay with the horse." She obeyed, hands gripping the reins. Every creak of a door or shout from the saloon made her flinch. But Cal returned sooner than she expected, a sack of flour slung over one shoulder, tobacco, and a small tin of sugar in hand. On the ride back, snow began to fall, soft at first, then thicker, the world fading into white. The wind howled through the canyons, erasing the trail behind them. Cora shivered, pressing close. "We'll never make it home in this." "We'll make it," Cal said, voice steady as stone. "Lean into me." They rode through the storm for hours. At one point, the horse stumbled, and Cal swung down, leading it through knee-deep snow while Cora clung to the saddle horn. She wanted to protest, to tell him to rest, but his face was set in grim determination. When the wind tore at her hood, he stopped, pulled his own coat around her shoulders, and said, "Keep it. You need it more." "But you—" He cut her off with a look. "I've seen worse than cold." The last mile home was a blur of white and silence. By the time they reached the cabin, darkness had fallen and Cora could barely feel her feet. Cal lifted her down from the horse and carried her inside as if she weighed nothing at all. He set her by the fire, pulled off her boots, and rubbed warmth back into her hands. "You did good," he murmured. "You didn't quit." Her voice trembled. "I was afraid." He looked at her, eyes softening. "So was I. Fear keeps you breathing. Quitting stops it." As the firelight flickered, Cora studied his face, the scar that curved across his cheek, the tiredness in his eyes, the strange gentleness in a man built for war against nature. "You've lost someone, haven't you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded once. "My wife. Long ago. I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, though his voice cracked on the words. "She's the reason I still know what love looks like." Something in that confession broke open inside her. She reached out, touched his hand. His skin was rough, warm, alive. He didn't pull away. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, their breaths steadied in unison. That night, Cal sat by the fire until she slept. He watched the way her lashes trembled, the way her face softened in dreams. When the flames dimmed, he whispered, not to her, not even to the memory of his wife, but to the quiet itself. "Maybe this time I can keep someone safe." Winter settled hard over the mountain, sealing the world in silence and frost. Days shortened, nights stretched endless, and the cabin became both their prison and their refuge. Yet for Cora, every sunrise there felt like mercy. The first week, she still woke in fear, half expecting to hear Madame Lucilla's voice barking orders or her father's boots thudding down the stairs. But instead, there was only the sound of the fire, the low snort of Cal's horse outside, and the steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood. The mountain man moved through his days with the precision of someone who'd learned discipline in solitude. Before dawn, he'd be out checking traps, then back with snow dusting his hair, his beard stiff with ice. He'd hang rabbits or grouse by the door, clean them at the chopping block, and bring the meat inside. Cora began to help him, at first clumsy and uncertain. She'd never skinned anything before, never chopped wood, never walked through snow that came up to her knees. But Cal had patience. "Don't fight the weight," he told her once, steadying her grip on the axe handle. "Let the swing carry through. The mountain rewards steady hands." She learned quickly, eager to prove she wasn't helpless. She swept, cooked, mended clothes, melted snow for water, patched torn gloves. In return, Cal built her a shelf near the window where she could place wild flowers that somehow still bloomed beneath the frost, little bursts of color against the gray world. Every night, they shared supper by the fire. Cal ate quietly, his manners rough but gentle. Sometimes, when he caught her watching him, he'd give a half-smile that warmed her better than the flames. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked one evening. He stirred his stew, eyes on the pot. "People talk too much down there. Up here the wind's honest. So is hunger. So's death." She hesitated. "And so's kindness?" His eyes lifted to hers. "If you find it." Their gazes held. She looked away first, pretending to fuss with her bowl, but her heart wouldn't stop pounding. As days turned to weeks, the rhythm of their lives began to blend. Cora took to humming while she worked, soft, half-forgotten lullabies her mother used to sing before the bottle, and bitterness took her voice. Cal didn't say anything at first, but one day, when she stopped humming, he murmured, "Don't. The quiet misses it." From then on, she sang freely. Sometimes, when he came in from the cold, she'd have a pot of soup already waiting. Sometimes, when she struggled to lift a bucket of water, he'd appear silently, take the handle, and carry it as if it weighed nothing. Once, after she burned her hand pulling bread from the fire, he took her wrist gently, blew on the reddened skin, and wrapped it with a strip torn from his own shirt. "You've got to respect heat," he said, voice low. "It can save you, or it can ruin you." She smiled faintly, like people. He didn't answer, but his hand lingered a second longer than needed. By late February, the worst of the snow had passed. The sky softened into long streaks of rose and silver at dusk. One evening, Cora stepped outside to gather firewood and saw Cal kneeling by the frozen creek, mending a snare. The light caught his hair, turning it almost gold. He looked older than she'd first thought, but strong, certain, carved out of the same granite as the mountain itself. When he rose and noticed her watching, he grinned, a rare, boyish expression that startled her. "What?" She shook her head, flustered. "I've never met anyone like you." He chuckled, low and rough. "Good, world's better off that way." But later, when they sat by the fire, he asked quietly, "What about you, Cora? What did you dream of before all that?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know. I suppose to have a small bakery someday, to feed people who looked at me without disgust. Bread smells like forgiveness, doesn't it?" Cal nodded slowly. "You could do that. You've got the hands for it." She laughed. "Hands for scrubbing floors, maybe." His tone deepened, serious now. "No, hands that make something out of nothing." The compliment sat between them like a secret. When storms returned, heavier but brief, they spent nights talking. Cal told her about the forests, the rivers that froze so clear you could see trout asleep beneath the ice, the stars that came alive on still nights. She told him about books she'd read by candlelight, about stories of faraway cities she'd never see. "Maybe someday you will," he said. She shook her head. "I don't need to. My world's big enough right here." Something in the way she said it made his breath hitch. He turned away quickly, pretending to check the fire. In March, the first thaw came. Water began to run under the snow, whispering promises of spring. Cal decided to ride down to trade furs for supplies. "I'll go with you," Cora said. He frowned. "Too far. The trail's rough." She lifted her chin. "I've been through worse." He stared at her, then sighed. "All right, but you stay close." They rode out together again, two shadows against the melting white. This time, Cora sat her own horse, small and sturdy, one Cal had caught and trained. The first few miles were quiet, except for the sound of hooves crunching through slush. Then Cal said, almost shyly, "You ride well." "I had to learn fast," she said with a grin. "You don't want to be the one slowing down a man like you." He smirked. "No danger of that. You've got fire, girl." At the trading post, she caught sight of herself in a cracked mirror, cheeks pink from cold, eyes bright. For the first time in her life, she didn't look ashamed of what she saw. That night, back at the cabin, she baked a loaf of bread, her first since childhood. The smell filled the small room. When Cal broke the crust and took a bite, His eyes softened. "Tastes like home," he said. Cora blinked back tears. "That's all I ever wanted it to taste like." He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb brushed her knuckles, rough and warm. "Then you've done it." Outside, the snow melted in slow rivulets trickling down toward the valley. Inside, something else began to thaw, a space inside both of them long frozen by grief and fear. For the first time since the night she ran into the dark, Cora didn't feel like a survivor. She felt alive. And when Cal looked at her that evening, his eyes were no longer only gray. They were full of light. Spring came cautiously to the mountain, melting snow, dripping eaves, the hush of thawing streams. For Cora, it was a rebirth. Each morning she woke to birdsong instead of curses. Each night she fell asleep beside the slow breathing of a man whose silence meant safety, not scorn. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. One afternoon, Cal returned from town with a stiffness in his shoulders Cora hadn't seen before. He unpacked the sack of supplies without a word: flour, coffee, salt, and 2 bullets fewer than when he'd left. Cora noticed immediately. "Something happened?" Cal hesitated, then finally said, "Lucille was talking. Said a man came asking about you. Said he'd pay double what I gave for your freedom." Cora froze, her hands trembling over the loaf she was kneading. "My father," she whispered. "He'll come for me." Cal's jaw tightened. "He can come. He won't leave." But that night she couldn't sleep. The wind scraped against the cabin walls, and every creak felt like footsteps in the dark. When Cal stirred in his chair near the fire, she spoke softly. "You shouldn't have paid for me, Cal. You've made enemies you didn't need." He looked up, eyes hard. "You think I care about that?" "I think you care about surviving." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Surviving isn't the same as living, Cora. You should know that better than anyone." The words hit her with quiet truth. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me." Cal stood, crossed to her, and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then trust me to handle it." In the following days, the tension in the air thickened. Cal began to patrol the perimeter of their land each morning, rifle slung across his back. Cora watched from the doorway, heart tight, as his figure moved through the pines, alone, vigilant, unbreakable. She wanted to believe they were safe, but the mountain had ears. News traveled fast, even through snow. One evening, as Cora stirred stew on the stove, Cal said quietly, "You should know something. I wasn't always a trapper." She turned. "What do you mean?" "I fought in the war, Union scout. After that I hunted men for bounty. Did it for years, until I realized killing for coin made me no better than the ones I hunted." Cora's breath caught. "You've killed people?" He didn't flinch. "Men who deserved it. Others, I'm not so sure." He looked at his hands, scarred and strong. "That's why I came here. The mountain forgives what people won't." She took a slow step closer. "You saved me, Cal. That's the only thing I'll ever remember." He gave a rough laugh. "You shouldn't make saints out of men like me." "I'm not," she said softly, "but you're the first man who's ever looked at me and seen more than shame." The words lingered between them, raw and dangerous. By May, the threat had a name. A trader passing through told Cal that Raymond Hartley had been seen in Devil's Crossing, drunk, broke, and talking about his runaway daughter who stole a fortune in flesh. He'd hired men, mean ones, 10 or 12, the kind that didn't ask questions only price. Cal's expression didn't change as he listened, but when he returned home, he began stockpiling ammunition and reinforcing the doors. Cora noticed the change in him, the quiet intensity, the way he checked every shadow twice. "You're expecting them?" "I'm preparing," he said. "It's different." That night, as thunder rolled over the ridges, Cora said the words she'd been holding back. "You can send me away, Cal. I'll go. If I'm gone, they won't bother you." He turned from the window, voice low but firm. "Don't say that again. I don't want to cost you your life." He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupped her face in his rough hands. "My life stopped meaning much after Ingrid died. You gave it back to me. If I lose it protecting that gift, it won't be wasted." Her eyes filled with tears. "You make everything sound so simple." "It is," he said. "Love's the only thing simple left." She pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling his heart thud steady beneath the layers of leather and flannel. "Then I'll stay. But if anything happens, I'll fight too." He smiled faintly. "You'll do as I say." She looked up at him with quiet fire. "No, Cal, not this time." For a moment, he stared at her, and then his grin widened, proud and a little heartbroken. "That's my girl." The days before the storm were strange, too quiet, too still. The woods held their breath. Cora baked bread, tended the garden patch, and pretended her hands weren't shaking. Cal kept his rifle cleaned and his horse saddled. One afternoon, while gathering water, Cora found a small pine carving on the fence post, a figure of a woman, round and smiling, holding a loaf of bread. The lines were rough but full of care. Cal's work, she realized. Her throat tightened. That night, she set the carving on the mantel. "Why did you make this?" she asked softly. He shrugged, eyes on the fire. "To remind me why I fight." "You think they'll come soon?" "Yes. And if they do, I'll stop them." "Even if it kills you?" He looked at her then, and his voice was quiet but certain. "Especially if it kills me." Cora shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Don't talk like that." He brushed the tears away with his thumb. "Then don't cry like that. You're stronger than you think." Outside, thunder rolled again, far away, yet coming closer. The mountain held its breath, and the fire crackled, throwing their shadows against the walls like 2 souls stitched together by fate. Cal leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers. "If tomorrow brings a fight, promise me you'll run if I tell you." "I won't. Promise me." She looked up, fierce and trembling. "No." He exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. "Stubborn woman. You wouldn't love me if I wasn't." He kissed her then, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that leaves no room for goodbye, only memory. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. The storm came at dusk, black clouds boiling over the ridges, wind slicing through the trees, the scent of rain mingled with gun oil. Cora had just set the kettle by the fire when Cal stiffened, his head tilting toward the window. He didn't need to speak. She heard it too. Hooves, many, moving fast. He rose, loaded his rifle, and checked the revolver at his hip. "They're here." Cora's heart pounded. "How many?" "More than I'd like." Lightning split the sky, illuminating figures at the edge of the clearing, 10 men on horseback, rifles glinting. And at their center, Raymond Hartley, her father. Even from the window, she could see the drink had burned what little humanity remained in him. His beard was unkempt, his coat filthy, and his voice, when he shouted up the hill, was thick with hate. Cordelia, you think you can shame me and run? You belong to me. Cora flinched, but Cal's hand found her shoulder. You don't answer him, not a word. Raymond laughed, a sound like rust scraping bone. Mountain man, give me the girl and maybe I'll let you keep your skin. Cal stepped out onto the porch, the rifle steady in his hands, his silhouette cut against the storm. You've got one chance to ride back down that hill. Raymond spat into the mud. You think I fear a washed-up trapper? Cal fired a single warning shot. The bullet shattered a lantern hanging from Raymond's saddle. Next one doesn't miss. The men hesitated. The storm screamed around them, rain falling in hard slants. Then one of Raymond's hired guns raised his weapon, and chaos broke loose. Gunfire cracked through the valley. Cal moved like he'd been born for it, each shot deliberate, each step calculated. 3 men fell before the others even found cover. Stay inside, he shouted over his shoulder. But Cora didn't listen. She grabbed the spare rifle from the corner, loaded it with shaking hands, and crawled to the window. Her father's men were circling the cabin trying to flank Cal. She took a breath, aimed, and fired. One of the riders dropped. Her body shook with adrenaline and fear, but also something fiercer, resolve. Outside, Cal reloaded, ducked behind a rain barrel, and returned fire. Thunder drowned the gunshots. Lightning illuminated the chaos, horses panicking, men shouting, mud flying. Raymond screamed orders. Get the girl alive, the man's mine. Cal's voice cut through the storm. She's nobody's property. A shot rang out, grazing his arm. He grunted, but didn't falter. He switched the rifle to his left hand and kept firing. Inside, Cora's hands were raw from reloading. She caught sight of Raymond creeping closer to the porch, revolver raised. Her blood turned cold. She fired again, but the hammer clicked empty. Cal! She screamed. He turned just as Raymond pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Cal square in the back, the sound dull and final. He stumbled forward, dropped to one knee, then turned, fury igniting behind his pain. He raised his revolver and shot Raymond through the chest. The old man fell, face first into the mud, the rain washing away the blood. The last 2 gunmen fled into the trees, their courage gone with their paymaster. The clearing went silent, except for the storm. Cora ran out into the rain, slipping on the wet boards, falling to her knees beside Cal. No, 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 please, God, no! He smiled faintly, rain streaking his face like tears. You did good. Don't talk. I can fix this. I can... He caught her trembling hand, pressed it to his chest. Listen, you live. You raise our child strong. You bake that bread. You keep laughing. Her sobs broke the night. Cal, please, don't leave me. He tried to speak again, but his voice failed. His fingers brushed her cheek once, then stilled. Cora's cry tore through the valley like thunder. The rain kept falling, washing the blood from his shirt, the mud from her knees, the past from both of them. By dawn, the storm had passed. The storm broke with the dawn. Mist hung low across the valley, thin and silver, like the breath of the dead. The birds hadn't yet returned. Even they seemed to mourn. Cora sat beside Cal's body until the sun rose. She didn't cry anymore. Her tears had emptied with the night. She only held his hand, now cold, the hand that had built her a home, carved her safety out of wilderness, taught her that love could exist without cruelty. When the first light touched the mountain tops, she whispered, I'll keep your promise, Cal. I'll live. It took her all day to bury him. She dug in silence beneath the pine tree that shaded the graves of Ingrid and Freya, the wife and daughter he had lost. Her arms burned, her fingers bled, but she didn't stop until the ground accepted him beside them. She carved his name into a slab of river stone with the same knife he had once used to carve her a small wooden figure. The letters were rough, uneven, but honest. Callum Wolfsbane, a good man who loved without measure. When the grave was done, she knelt, placed the pine carving he had made for her at its base, and pressed her lips to the stone. I'll raise our child to know your name, to know that courage looks like kindness, and that love is never a mistake. Then she walked back to the cabin, her cabin now, her steps steady, her heart broken but unbowed. Months passed. The mountain greened again. The streams ran clear. Wildflowers crept up through the thaw. And inside that small cabin, life stirred anew. Cora's belly grew round, her back ached, her hands never stopped working. She planted a garden, chopped wood, baked bread that filled the air with warmth. She talked to Cal when the nights got too quiet, telling him about the baby's kicks, about how she missed his snore, about how the world outside was still cruel but less frightening now that she'd faced it. When the child came, a son, strong and loud as thunder, she named him Callum Hartley Wolfsbane. He had her eyes and Cal's steady calm. On quiet evenings, she would carry him to the porch, cradle him against her chest, and tell him stories about his father, the man who found her in the snow and taught her what freedom really meant. "Your father wasn't perfect," she would whisper, "but he was good, and goodness is rarer than gold in this world, my love." The boy would smile in his sleep, the firelight dancing over his face, and Cora would feel Cal beside her again, in the creak of the wood, in the hum of the wind through the trees, in the warmth that still lingered long after the fire burned down. She had lost everything once. Now she had something eternal. Love had not saved Cal's life, but it had given hers meaning. Every time a story like Cora and Cal's is told, it reminds us that love isn't about how long it lasts. It's about how deeply it changes us while it burns. He gave his life protecting her dream. She kept living to honor his. That's what love on the frontier meant. Fierce, raw, unbreakable. If you've ever loved someone who made you believe you could start again, even after the world tried to end you, this story was for you. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe love is worth dying for, stay a while.